At 3 p.m. local time, the USS Vella Gulf's radio room picked up a distress call that would make naval history. The tanker MV Polaris was under attack. 7 men in a wooden skiff had thrown a boarding ladder against her hull. The transmission cut in and out, but the situation was clear. A hijacking attempt was in progress. Captain Mark Janung was in the Combat Information Center within 90 seconds. The CIC sits in the heart of the cruiser. A darkened space filled with radar screens and tactical displays. Blue light from the monitors cast shadows across the faces of watchstanders as they plotted the Polaris position.
60 miles.
At flank speed, the Vella Gulf could cover that in about 75 minutes. But the math got complicated fast. Music. The skiff sat approximately 60 nautical miles from Somali territorial waters. That 12 miles line off the coast created a legal boundary that changed everything. Chasing pirates inside that line required permissions that took longer to obtain than pirates needed to vanish. A skiff running at 25 knots would cross that line in under 2 hours. The Vella Gulf served as the flagship for Combined Task Music Force 151, a multinational counter-piracy force that had existed for exactly 1 month, 33 days of patrolling without a single capture. Ships from a dozen nations, UN authorization, rules of engagement that allowed hunting pirates across 1 million square miles of ocean. Everything except proof the concept actually worked. Captain Jong intended to provide that proof. But the math said the pirates would reach Somali waters before the Vella Gulf could intercept. Except the Vella Gulf carried 2 SH-60B Seahawks that could each deliver democracy at 150 knots. They could reach that skiff in 15 minutes.
Zhang didn't hesitate.
He ordered a helicopter launched immediately while the ship was still accelerating the flank speed. No slowing down, no stabilizing the platform. It was the kind of order that gets people hurt if anything goes wrong. It was also the only math that worked. Launching a helicopter from a ship making 30 knots music is not standard procedure. The flight deck becomes a chaos of wind swirling around the superstructure, salt spray fouling engine intakes, and a platform that won't stop pitching. Standard procedure calls for slowing down and stabilizing. Standard procedure takes time. At 3:04 p.m., the Seahawk's rotors spin up anyway. The pilot timed the ship's roll, waited for the deck to pitch level, and pulled the collective. The aircraft lifted off while the Vella Gulf carved through the water at 30 knots. Spray washing across the flight deck behind it. 3 aircrew, 1 cabin door-mounted M240 machine gun, 500 music rounds against 7 armed men who just attempted a hijacking.
The aircraft banked hard toward the Polaris' last known position.
On the cabin door, the sensor operator, the CNO in Navy shorthand, checked the M240 speed tray and settled into position. His job was simple. Sit in the door with music, the machine gun, and engage whatever the pilot pointed him at. Against a wooden skiff, an M240 should be adequate. The weapon accurately engages targets beyond music, 1,000 meters. But 7 men with AK-47s can fill the air with lead, and the Seahawk skin is aluminum. Rifle rounds punch through it like cardboard. By 3:07 p.m., the Seahawk was pushing 150 knots, 12 miles from the Polaris, and closing fast. The SH-60B carries APS-124 search radar capable of detecting small boats beyond 25 nautical miles. At 3:12, the radar painted a contact 5 miles south of the tanker. Small, slow-moving, heading southwest toward Somalia. The pilot adjusted course.
The FLIR forward. Looking infrared locked on 30 seconds later.
A hot outboard engine glowed white on the display. 7 warm bodies clustered in the boat. The count matched the Polaris report exactly. The skip was already running, not at full speed, maybe 15 knots, but definitely heading for the 12 miles line. The helicopter closed the distance in under 2 minutes. At 3:19 p.m., the pilot established orbit at 300 m, close enough for accurate door gunfire, far enough to maneuver if someone below shouldered an RPG. The skip didn't stop, didn't slow down, just kept grinding southeast at 15 knots while the helicopter circled overhead.
The CNO tracked the movement through the FLIR.
1 man at the outboard motor, 2 near the bow, hunched over something covered by a tarp. 4 others scattered across the deck, faces turned upward toward the aircraft. No weapons visible, but that tarp could hide anything. The CNO relayed the contact report back to the Vella Gulf. 7 personnel confirmed heading 240 at 15 knots. Currently 18 miles from Somali territorial waters. The response came back immediately. Maintain music surveillance. Vella Gulf was 62 minutes out. 62 minutes. At 15 knots, the skiff would music cover roughly 15 nautical miles. That put them inside Somali waters before the Vella Gulf could intercept. The pilot reported the math problem. At current speed, the contact would cross the 12 miles line before the cruiser arrived. Captain Janong's response was immediate. Do what you need to do to slow them down. The pilot dropped the Seahawk to 150 feet and roared past music, the skiff close enough to rattle their teeth. The downwash from the rotors kicked up a wall of spray that drenched everyone aboard. The noise was deafening.
Twin General Electric T700 turbo shafts screaming at full power.
Rotor wash turning the Gulf surface into a circular music storm of white water. The Senso leaned out of the door, M240 visible, barrel tracking across the boat. The message was clear.
Stop. The skiff kept running.
The pilot pulled up, banked hard, and came around for another pass. This time, he approached from the bow, flying directly at the skiff at 50 feet. The pirates could see straight into the cockpit, helmeted figures behind the windscreen. The aircraft growing larger by the second, filling their entire field of vision. The pilot held course music until the last possible moment, then pulled up and thundered overhead close enough that the pirates ducked flat against the deck.
The skiff kept running.
Third pass, the pilot brought the Seahawk around in a tight arc and matched the skiff's heading. He dropped to 30 feet and held position directly ahead of the boat, forcing the helmsman to either stop or steer around. The helicopter hung there like a wall of noise and threat, rotors churning the air, exhaust heat washing over the skiff's bow. The Senso's M240 pointed straight at the man behind the outboard. At this music range, he couldn't miss. The helmsman steered around. He cranked the tiller hard left, the skid heeling over as it carved around the hovering aircraft, then straightened out and kept heading southeast. The Sino watched through the FLIR as one of the men near the bow reached under the tarp. His finger moved to the trigger.
The hand came back holding a plastic jug.
The man poured water over his head, washing off the spray from the helicopter's pass. Finger back to the trigger guard. The skiff's outboard coughed, then roared louder. The bow lifted as the throttle opened up.
20 knots.
25. The pirates had decided to run for real. The pilot matched speed and reported the development. Target now making 25 knots. They were running. The math had changed again. At 25 knots, the skip would reach Somali waters in roughly 43 minutes. The Vella Gulf was still 58 minutes out at flank speed. A helicopter could follow the whole way, but following isn't stopping. The Seahawk couldn't physically block a boat. It could shoot. But shooting men in a fleeing skiff, even pirates, required justification the pilot didn't have. He needed them to stop, or he needed them to do something that justified stopping them permanently. For the next 23 minutes, the Seahawk shadowed the skip at 300 m.
The Senso's eyes never music. Left the FLIR display.
Every moment demanded interpretation. A man shifting position, reaching for a weapon, or just getting comfortable. Someone bending music toward the deck, grabbing a rifle or tying a shoe. The tarp at the bow rippling in the wind, or something moving underneath. The sensor's music, finger rested alongside the M240's trigger guard. Not on the trigger, never on the trigger music, until the shot was certain, but close enough that half a second would change everything. A man at the stern reached into his waistband. Music, finger moved toward trigger. The hand came back holding a cigarette pack. Finger returned to the trigger guard. This happened 11 times in 23 music minutes. 11 moments where the Sino's body screamed threat while his training demanded music, certainty. 11 times the trigger didn't move. The pilot watched fuel consumption, music, tick down. The Seahawk burns roughly 180 gall per hour of normal flight.
Pursuit burns more.
Music, they launched with 600 G and the gauge was dropping faster than he liked.
Below the skiff's outboard screamed at maximum throttle.
White wake stretched behind it like an accusation. The pirates had committed to the run. And then at the 23-minute mark, the outboard coughed, sputtered, then stopped. The skiff spout dropped as the thrust disappeared. The boat's momentum carried it forward for another 100 meters, speed bleeding away with every second. The wake behind it flattened and vanished. The man at the motor yanked the pull cord. Nothing. Yanked again. The engine turned over once, caught for half a second, then died again. Smoke puffed from the engine housing. The acrid smell of burned oil and overheated metal drifting up toward the circling helicopter. The engine had run too hot for too long, pushed past its music limits. The same desperation that made them run had ruined their only chance of escape. 7 men sat music in a stillboat, watching their options evaporate. The helicopter resumed music, its orbit 300 m. M240 trained on the deck. The Sino reported the development. Target dead in the water. Engine failure. The Vella Gulf music was still 31 miles out. 31 minutes is a long time when you're holding 7 armed men at gunpoint with 1 machine gun.
The skiff sat motionless on the glassy water. The afternoon sun beat down.
Heat shimmered off the surface. The Sino kept the M240 trained on the tarp at the bow. Whatever was under there, and something was definitely under there, it hadn't moved. The 2 men sitting near it hadn't moved either.
Everyone on the boat knew the rules now.
Movement meant an early retirement. The fuel gauge kept ticking down. The pilot ran calculations in his head. Current consumption rate, distance back to the Vella Gulf reserve requirements. The math still worked, but the margins were getting thin. If something went wrong, if the skip somehow got moving again, if a firefight broke out, if they had to pursue or evade, those margins would evaporate. He held the orbit steady, 300 m. Constant altitude, minimum fuel burn while music, maintaining weapons coverage. At 4:15 p.m., a gray shape appeared on the horizon. The Sino saw it first on radar, and visually the Vella's bow wave catching the afternoon light. Over 10,000 tons of freedom cutting through the Gulf at flank speed. The pirates saw it too.
Heads turned, bodies shifted.
One of them pointed toward the approaching ship. The Sino's finger moved toward the trigger, then back to the guard when his hand stayed empty.
The Vella Gulf grew larger by the minute.
By 425, her hull number was visible, CG-72. By 4:30, music, the details of her superstructure emerged. The Spy 1 radar arrays, the 41 Malawian Quachas VLS cells, the 5-inch gun on the foredeck. At 4:35, the cruiser slowed to 10 knots and maneuvered into position 200 m from the skiff. The orbiting Seahawk continued its circle, but it now had a backup. On the cruiser's stern, figures and body armor climbed into music, black inflatable boats. 2 ribs launched from the Vella Gulf at 4:40 p.m. 7-meter rigid hull inflatables with twin outboards capable of pushing past 40 knots.
7 operators per boat.
Body armor, helmets, primary weapons slung.
Across chests.
An M240 machine gun mounted at each bow. 7.62 mm NATO, 950 rounds per minute, effective range of 1,800 m. Against a wooden skiff at close range, the M240 spoke a language the pilots could definitely understand. The boat split immediately after clearing the ship.
One curved north, throttle wide open.
Twin outboards howling, wake spraying behind it in a rooster tail of white water. The other swung south on the same heading. They moved fast, 40 knots plus, eating up the distance between the cruiser and the skiff in under a minute.
The pirates watched them come.
One of them stood up and 3 M240s immediately tracked to him.
He sat back down.
Within 60 seconds, the ribs had helped box the skiff from 4 directions.
The Vella Gulf to the east, the Seahawk orbiting to the west, ribs north and south. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
Even if the outboard magically came back to life, there was no gap in the Gordon. Both boats reached holding positions 20 m from the skiff and stopped their engines. The sudden silence was almost shocking after hours of helicopter rotors and turbine whine.
Just a slap of waves against hulls, the creak of a skiff, and 7 men breathing.
The M240 gunners kept their weapons trained on the pirates. The boat crews watched for any movement.
Fingers on triggers, safety's off.
The pirates didn't move. Hands stayed visible. Bodies stayed still. The Sino kept the M240 locked on the tarp. If anyone reached for whatever was under there, he'd have a clear shot. 200 meters was nothing for the M240. He could put rounds through that tarp before anyone's hand reached what was underneath. At 4:46 p.m., the lead rib began its final approach. The coxswain throttled up and aimed for the skiff's port side. The hull closed the distance in seconds. 20 m becoming 10, 10 becoming 5, 5 becoming contact. The rib's inflatable tube compressed against the wooden hull of the skiff with a dull bump. The skiff sat low on the water, maybe 20 feet long, open deck. The operators could step directly from the rib gun whale onto the skiff's deck. No ladder needed. That transition creates maximum vulnerability. One foot leaves the rib, the other hasn't reached the skiff. Both vessels move independently, music, one rising while the other falls, one drifting left while the other drifts right. The swell in the Gulf wasn't much. Maybe 2 feet, but 2 feet is enough to throw off timing. Enough to leave a man straddling open water with 30 pounds of gear dragging him down. Anyone reaching music, for a rifle during those suspended seconds gets a clean shot at an exposed target. The lead operator didn't hesitate. He timed the swell, planted his foot on the rib's gun whale, and stepped across music, in one fluid motion.
First operator across. Boot on deck. Weapon up.
Muzzle tracking across the boat. 2 men at the bow sitting on their hands.
1 at the dead outboard. Arms crossed.
4 clustered near the middle.
Frozen in music, place.
Second operator across taking position to cover the bow. Third operator moving toward the stern.
4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. The rib emptied fast.
Each sailor finding his sector. The starboard rib made contact with the opposite side. More operators flooding aboard. Music 14 armed sailors now stood on a boat designed for 7. The skip's freeboard dropped an inch from the added weight. The first pirate went down without resistance. Knees on wood, hands above his head, flex cuffs ratcheted, closed around his wrists. Second pirate down, the one who'd been at the outboard. He didn't resist. Didn't even look up. Third, fourth. The 2 near the bow, finally moving away from the tarp. One operator kept his weapon trained on the covered shape while another secured the pirates. 5th pirate down. 6th, an older man, gray in his beard. He knelt slowly, deliberately, flex cuffs closed. The 7th pirate, younger than the others, hesitated, eye contact with the operator standing over him, something flickering behind those eyes. The M240S didn't waver. The helicopter kept circling. 14 weapons, music, pointed at one man in a wooden boat. His hands went up. His knees hit the deck. Flex cuffs closed. 7 pirates secured. Bye for now.